Well, allow me to introduce my wonderful friend,
Oh,
Katherine.
we should all be.
Yes, probably. Um, I met Katherine about 30 years ago, kind of astonishing, since we're not that old, at a Midwest Archivists Conference where we were both presenting. And we became colleagues, and then over the many, many years have worked on many projects together and became very good friends. Katherine founded and directed the Kurt Teich Postcard Archive, which was housed at the Lake County Discovery Museum, part of the Lake County Forest Reserve District for many, many years. And prior to the internet, when I was doing a lot of photo research for museums and publications, her archive was my secret weapon because very few people knew about it. And they had everything under the sun. Any place you could think of, any town, any area, they had exquisite photographs, photographic postcards. So Katherine will explain a little bit more about that. She became the director of the Lake County Discovery Museum, where when I had my museum exhibit design firm, we did a lot of work for the Forest Reserve District, including designing all the permanent exhibits for that museum. And the experience that Katherine and I and the curator Diana had with label writing was one of the high points of my career because it was so much fun. It was just remarkable. And I had a quite wonderful office for a long time. We had a very nice conference room and we would meet in the back, and my staff and my partners would come in every once in a while going, what is going on? There's just this raucous laughter coming from the back room. And it was just really absolutely marvelous. And we just, it was great. Our experiences and our questioning of everything just made for really wonderful, wonderful labels. Katherine became the director of the museum, and then she spearheaded the donation of this remarkable collection of postcards to the Newberry, where it is now safely ensconced and is really a major part of their collection. It's 2.5 million postcards. It's, I think, the largest public collection of postcards in the world. Katherine is now the director of the Public Affairs and Development of the Lake County Forest Reserve District, and she is an artist and a dear friend. And I want to welcome her, to introduce her to this incredible new group of virtual friends that the Salon is. And I'm really thrilled that you're able to share your passion with the rest of us. So take it away, Katherine.
Okay, let's see if I can share my screen here.
Confidence.
Uh-oh.
It's intimidating.
You can do it.
Well, the thing is, I don't know. See, if I do that, then I can't see the share screen button.
If you do what?
If I bring my presentation onto my screen, then I can't see the Zoom share.
Don't fill the whole screen. Shrink it a little bit.
Let's see. Let me see if I get rid of this.
Barbara, you're on mute.
I'm on mute?
No.
Oh, no. Okay.
I'm loving there you go, that the most respected pros are still befuddled by this.
Okay, now you guys can all see it. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Whew.
Well done.
Okay, let me get rid of all of your pictures here on the side.
Beg your pardon.
Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Barbara, and hello, everybody. And I'm really pleased to be with you. Alan has mentioned to me, we talk all the time, and in fact, it's a rare day that goes by when we don't send a heart to each other on a text or something. In fact, if a few days go by and we wonder what's happened to each other, then we'll go into a flurry of activity. And he has mentioned the Salon several times to me, and always just that it's engrossing and that he enjoys your company. And so I'm very pleased to be with you, and I understand that you're scattered all over the place. I did ask Alan where everyone would be located when they were on the call, and he said, well, I think we've got Brooklyn and Los Angeles and maybe Israel and a lot of Chicago, and I don't know. And the reason I asked that question is because I give speaking engagements around the state of Illinois on this subject as part of the Illinois Humanities Council Rhodes Scholar Program. And wherever I go in the state, I always tailor some parts of my presentation to that location. So in this particular case, since it's a Zoom call with people from such a widespread geography, I did throw in a few cards that may resonate with those of you who just got your vaccine at Dodger Stadium. Although I didn't pick out Dodger Stadium. So just to orient you a little bit to what I'll be presenting this afternoon, it's kind of a Frankenstein presentation in that it doesn't seek to cover the entire history of picture postcards. It does focus fairly closely on American picture postcards, but I'll be giving a little bit of an overview of picture postcards and how they came to be, and then touch quite a bit on Kurt Teich Company, which was in Chicago, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. I'm perfectly happy to answer questions if someone wants to speak up during the presentation. I can see all your faces there on the right side of my screen. So if I can either, you can just say, what is that down there on the left-hand corner? Whatever you would like to say, I'm perfectly happy. Or if you would like me to just present and then we kind of have questions and answers at the end. Does it matter to everyone or? Okay, well, we'll play that by ear. So postcards, what you see on your screen actually is maybe to your eye, to your visceral eye, I guess I would say, not quite a postcard because it's a little skinny top to bottom and it's a little wide side to side. And this is actually a decorated envelope. Decorated envelopes and decorated stationery preceded postcards by some few decades after the advent of color lithography, but before the advent of the picture postcard as we know it today, with a picture, a place for the stamp, a place for the address that is not in an envelope. But in the decades before postcards came on the scene, these decorated envelopes and decorated letterhead were associated with the very same sort of experience that postcards were in later years. And that is the experience of being someplace, having seen something that is of interest to you and wanting to share that with someone else in another location. So the one you're looking at is from the 1880s. It's obviously the US Capitol. I didn't think about how this, and I'm not looking at the US Capitol, it's so much in my head, January 6th, but this was in a different time, the late 1880s. And then this next one is of the same genre as the decorated envelope, and that's a piece of decorated letterhead from 1861. This is an English piece. You see it's from the south coastal town of Bournemouth. And this piece of letterhead has a decoration at the top of a place, and then the subsequent pages of the letter would be blank. But nonetheless, this particular missive is very similar to what someone might write on a postcard. And in fact, in this particular example, very brief, it's just, I was waiting to write to you for a long time, wanted to get a sheet of paper with a pretty picture on it. And then at the very bottom, you see a little X and it says our house. And if you look in the upper center, you'll see a little X up on the bluff there. And that's where evidently not her house is, but we know a little bit about this particular correspondence. It was a young girl who was staying on the southern coast because she had respiratory problems and later had tuberculosis. But regardless of her story, it's a very similar sort of reason that she's sending this with a picture on it to someone who's probably back in London or Liverpool or wherever she lives. So the first picture postcards as we know them today, with a picture on it, a space for a message and a stamp box and a space for the address, appeared in 1889 at the Paris Exposition. And the centerpiece of the Paris Exposition in 1889 is, as you all know, I'm sure, the completion of the Eiffel Tower. Now, the Eiffel Tower at the time it was completed was the tallest human-made structure on Earth. And so it was remarkable today, but it was super remarkable in the time it was finished in 1889, and certainly a centerpiece of the experience of going to the exposition. So the French newspaper Le Figaro published a small series of postcards of the Eiffel Tower that could only be purchased if you ascended the Eiffel Tower to where the post office is. And maybe many of us here today have had the experience of doing that very same thing today, or in recent years, that there is a post office at one of the upper stages of the Eiffel Tower where you can write something and post it from the Eiffel Tower. But that has been the case since 1889. And the experience of ascending the tallest human-made structure on Earth was culminated in buying, for the first time in history, a postcard of that experience and posting it from that experience to somebody else far away. You'll notice something about this particular image is that the image is on one side, the left-hand side of the postcard, and there's this big blank space. And that's because between 1889 and 1907, it was actually not legal, or from the Postal Service's point of view, in any country to write on what the post offices in all countries regarded as the business side of a postcard, or the verso of the postcard, and that was the address and the stamp. So you couldn't write anything but the address and affix the stamp onto the front, so to speak, of the postcard. And so on the picture side, that was where these early postcard publishers accommodated a space for a message. This is the back of it's not the back of the same postcard, but it's a back also of a French postcard from that pre-1907 time period, where you can see that all that was allowed on the stamp side of the postcard was the address, space for the address. And so consequently, people really took advantage of that space. There are, I couldn't find them for the presentation today, but there are online, but there are many examples of extraordinarily small writing on these postcards so as to really fit in all you wanted to say to that person far away. This is a fairly good example of someone who's really taken advantage of one of these early postcards in the space for writing. And in some cases, we find postcards that have what's called cross writing for obvious reasons, where you write on one diagonal or on one side, and then you turn it and write over it, directly over it. And I've seen them also where you turn it again half as much and write diagonally over your writing. And as the recipient is reading the message, it does become clear as you turn that postcard in this case, although this is also a way of making the most of letter writing paper. Comes into focus what that person wants to say, but they used it on postcards as well. And so that's 1889. And, I should step back for just a moment and say that prior to 1889, this is why what I'm about to say is it makes the origin of the picture of the postcard kind of murky. It's not like it just sort of somebody published them and there they were. It wasn't like the Le Figaro postcards were the very first to come onto the scene. In fact, the post offices in most countries did and still do issue postcards that are blank. And you can use those for just correspondence. But in these very early days, what businesses of all sizes did, was to buy blank postcards and then stamp or print on those postcards usually some sort of advertising for a product or a service. And largely those had to also be sent in an envelope. So what I'm talking about today is, and with the French examples in 1889, are those picture postcards that were printed as one, not a blank card issued by the Postal Service in any country and then something overprinted on it, but rather a publisher such as Le Figaro deciding to print a decorative postcard for general popular consumption that encapsulated the experience of being somewhere and then wishing to communicate about it. So the Paris examples are the first to be what I just described. And Chicago, I know not everyone today is sitting in Chicago, but Alan and I are near enough, and a few of others, is the birthplace of the first American picture postcards. And those were published a few years later in 1893 for the World's Columbian Exposition. It was a set of 10 issued by Charles Goldsmith. And he did get special dispensation, I guess, to print postcards like this in the manner of the French cards, dispensation from the post office, and that they would be able to be accommodated through the Postal Service without an envelope. So you see one here, you see the decorative side of it, which is the recto of the postcard, where your message would be placed. So Chicago is the birthplace of the American picture postcard. So I'm going to jump briefly to the story of this man, and you're looking at Kurt Teich, T-E-I-C-H. He was born in 1877 in Lobenstein in Germany of a printing family. And it was Kurt's father who came to the Columbian Exposition in 1893 and spent some time in Chicago and went back to Lobenstein and told his sons that there was a lot of opportunity to be had in the United States and especially in Chicago, and encouraged them to leave Germany and go to the United States and seek their fortunes. So two of the sons did. One, Max Teich, came to Chicago and became quite a successful hotelier. And then Kurt Teich, that you see here as a 19-year-old young man, came to Chicago also and set up a printing shop. And when he first set up the shop, and he was from a printing family in Lobenstein, so this was not unusual for him to go into printing. His first shop was really just a general jobber printer. They would print anything that came through the door, German language newspaper for that part of Chicago, sort of on the near north side. They'd just print anything, broadsides, advertisements, business cards, circulars, anything. But and that was in 1898. He founded this company, Kurt Teich and Company, in 1898. And by about 1901 or 1902, he realized that he could possibly make something of this idea of picture postcards of place. In the intervening years between 1893 and the World's Columbian Exposition and 1901 or 1902, the postcard as a visual communication genre had begun to come into its own. And by its own, I meant that it came on the scene in the United States at a time when the United States itself was burgeoning. Towns were being built, people were heading west. The things in towns were a focus of great personal and community pride, such as the new Carnegie Library and anything that would be built in these towns as the population moved west. And that happened at exactly the same time as picture postcards came on the scene. And so these two things began to coalesce and generated or gave birth to a type of imagery that was less about, for a while at least, a little bit less about experience and a little bit more about place. And so Kurt Teich went on a trip with his own camera he followed the train line to Florida from Chicago, got off the train line in Florida, and then for some weeks followed that line up from Florida back to Chicago. And not every time, but at intervals, as the train would go along its route, he would get off, the train would continue on its route, and he spent some time in the town And he'd take views up Main Street and down Main Street and the new Carnegie Library and the, Oriental Revival Bandstand and the Five and Dime and whatever was of interest in the town. And while he was there, got businesses, drugstores, sometimes even postcard exchanges, which I'll comment on in a little bit, interested in this idea of pictures of place. And the Tyke family story is, and I think it's a bit of a fish story, but that he came back from that trip with $30,000 worth of orders, which in 1901 or 02 doesn't seem possible. But in any case, highly successful. And by the time he got back to Chicago, he'd found his niche and he really never looked back. This is the picture of the Tyke Company plant, which still looks almost exactly like this on Irving Park and Ravenswood in Chicago on the north side. It's now it's on the National Register, and it's condominiums called Postcard Place.
Oh, fun.
Huh?
That is fun. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, Tyke didn't just go into business like many publishers did, but he became the largest volume printer of view and advertising postcards in the world. And his company, which was in business from 1898 to 1978, so if you think about that, the first 80 years of the 20th century, his stock in trade was taking pictures of place, basically. And he published postcards for all the states of the United States, some 10,000 towns and cities, all the provinces of Canada, much of Northern South America, Central America, the Caribbean islands, and some European locations. And during the time his company was in business, I don't know if some people say that this is because he was German, but he scrupulously saved 15 examples of every postcard he printed in geographic and chronological order by a number, gave everything a numbering system. And much of that material was still in this building when the company went out of business in 1978, from the beginning to 1978. It's just a quick view inside the printing in the company in the very early days. You can see down in the lower right-hand corner, it says Kurt Tyke and Company, first offset press, 1910. The man at the left-hand side is not Tyke, he's a pressman, which was a highly skilled and revered job in those days. And what you see there on the press is the way postcards are actually still printed, but were printed back then. And that was many up, so to speak, to use printing terminology, on large sheets of paper that were then cut after they were printed. So Tyke, I'm jumping quite a bit from 1901 to 1910 to probably the early 1950s, but eventually the Kurt Tyke Company became most famous for this. And I think none of us would really argue that from a popular culture point of view, this so-called large letter postcards is an icon of the 20th century that even my 18-year-old son understands. You see this and you just sort of go, yeah, I get that. Whatever you saw portrayed in this graphic manner, you understand that's a large letter postcard. Well, several companies did print them, but the Tyke Company printed more of them than any other, and was the first company to print this kind of card. So that's what they're most known for, I think, today. But going back to the very beginning of when he went in business, this is just an early Tyke printed view of Coopersville, Michigan, is how he made his bread and butter. And that was towns and cities, and all the things in them. And this, if you put your hand over the top left-hand corner and covered that location, this could be Illinois, this could be the Finger Lakes of New York, this probably couldn't be Florida because of the trees, but you get my point that the stock in trade was to document towns and cities, and yet all of them were sort of the same, but all of them were different, and all of them beloved by the people who lived there. This particular view of the inside of a bank in Pullman, Illinois, I show for a very specific reason. This is one of my sort of favorite postcards, so to speak, because it is so common. And this view illustrates one of the documentary powers of these early postcard printers, that they printed anything that the business people and the community wanted them to print at the time they were printed. And in many, many cases for rural, especially for rural locations, early picture postcards are the only image we have of some of these places that would otherwise not have been photographed, precisely because they are so commonplace. But from a local history point of view, to us today, 100 years later, 120 years later, they're important. And it's because of these early postcard printers who went out and tried to make money by just documenting towns and cities, not in an artistic way, but in a sort of just a way to make money sort of way. What has come down to us is this archival evidence of American towns and cities as they changed in the 20th century. So it's everything from buildings in special places like New York City that have been photographed a million gazillion times to, again, any place USA, whether it's Pullman, Illinois, or Sutersville, Pennsylvania, or wherever it is. And this is how he made his money, documenting over 10,000 towns and cities over almost 80 years of time. So this next section is just a little sort of a jump into the pool of all the amazing things that appear on postcards, and going in, picking a way into that a little bit, so that it isn't just the street views, but it's all the activities of especially American culture in the first 3 decades of the 20th century. This is one of my favorite postcards of that early auto court experience. I love it because of the little cutaway of what you would find, the hominess of what you would find inside that auto court. To this, which is probably about maybe a decade and a half later than that one. This is from 1939. I love this one because of the color. It's very streamlined deco, not only in the style of the building that's being portrayed there, but in the way the building is presented graphically by the postcard printer, that says everything about 1939, the dense, rich color and the sort of, even though it's absolutely static, there's no movement in this scene, but it has a kind of a cool action about it that speaks to growing technology, I guess I would say. Going back, right back to sort of that auto camp time, is this one, which I used to illustrate community experience. This is Pumpkin Pie Day in Longmont, Colorado, which I recently learned they still celebrate. So it's been 100 years of Pumpkin Pie Day. Just another favorite image of mine, because you've got all these hundreds of pies and then the view on the left of serving the pies. And then my favorite, coffee goes with pie, on the right-hand side there. So this is a little bit more of a boosterism type postcard that began to come on the scene, I would say by 1910, somewhere right around the First World War. Sports are pictured on postcards. I realize I'm not talking to a entirely Chicago group here, but this is the Cubs. And then, so as to be even-handed, the same year, we've got the White Sox on the other side of town. Could have picked all baseball teams in the American or the National League were portrayed on postcards, as well as much of the action of the games themselves. I'm going to go past this one, actually. It's more for a Chicago audience. How many people are with us today live in Chicago or in the area? How many is it? Like 6, maybe? Yeah, looks like it. I think I'm going to go past this one. It is an early television show in the Chicago area. I did not grow up here, so this is not meaningful to me. I grew up more with Captain Kangaroo and
and I do remember Bozo.
Yes.
Oh yes.
But as technology appeared on the scene, so did the evidence of it on picture postcards until about the end of World War II. This is it's later, it's probably in the 60s, I would say, maybe late 60s, maybe even 1970. So this is quite late for a postcard of its type, but it postcards advertising entertainment were, and theatrical portraits and plays, and they were used for almost to advertise almost any type of performance entertainment. So all of that seems very happy, you know, Pumpkin Pie Day and I don't know, Bozo's Circus, and but postcards, and I won't show anything really disturbing here, but postcards were also or can be used as evidence of aspects of culture that were not necessarily all the happiness that you think of when you think of picture postcards. Does anyone know the origin of this, what you see there, this "Tell 'em we're rising, the young colored Americans message to the world"? Well, I'll just briefly tell you about it. I didn't know anything about it either until this is printed by the Kurt Tyke Company. This is "Tell 'em we're rising" became a motto of the African-American leader, Richard Robert Wright. He was born in 1855, so he was just a small boy at the time of the Civil War. And at the end of the Civil War, during Reconstruction, in 1868, the Union General O.O. Howard came down to the South and was addressing a crowd in the South, in a Southern city. And Richard Robert Wright, who was just a young man at that time, he was only 13, I think, 13 or 14 at the time of the address of this Union General coming down into the South. So this little boy, this 13-year-old boy, is in the crowd, a Black boy. And the general asked the assembled crowd what message he should bring from the South up to the North. And Richard Robert Wright called out, "Tell 'em we're rising." And that became Wright's lifelong motto. He became an African-American leader in those early days. This "Tell 'em we're rising" inspired James Greenleaf Whittier's poem, Howard at Atlanta. And this call became kind of an inspirational, motivational rallying cry for that generation of young African Americans in the years immediately after the Civil War. So there's a lot of a story that's just in this quite sort of heroic, emblematic postcard. But other expressions of the graphic expressions of the experience of African Americans appear in postcards, to the most awful. And again, I won't show you any of lynchings or anything like that. But in this particular case, this comes from a series of 6 postcards printed by the National Malleable Castings Company in Indianapolis, Indiana in about 1910. And you see along the border there, it says, "This is the colored men's dressing room." In this series, there's also the white men's dressing room, the colored women's dressing room, the white women's dressing room, and 2 other segregated locations. And it's interesting because it's expressive of that time period, sort of 1910, during a time of segregation, when the reason the Malleable Castings Company was printing these cards was just views of their facilities, had nothing to do with anything except in a way that they were sort of proud, or at least wanted to show the extent of their facilities. And another interesting thing about this particular series is that there's no difference between the facilities, colored and white. It's just simply that they are segregated. So it's a view into that aspect of the American experience. And then this one is as close as I'm going to touch on to anything that's disturbing. You see up in the upper left-hand corner that it was copyrighted 1923. And we know from the Tyke Company records that the client was the KKK in the South. This is something very interesting about this industrial collection. I call what was amassed, because Tyke kept examples of everything that was printed, as an uncurated collection. Because it's not like you or I would collect something and be specifically interested in something and begin to sort of collect examples of it, but rather the Type Company printed whatever the United States sort of brought to them, whatever kind of business they could go out and muster up, they would print it. And so it is a kind of an uncurated view of America as it saw itself, collected over these three of the first 2/3 of the 20th century. And this is a good example of that. So just quickly, a little section of kind of went from that rabbit trail into the African-American experience and back into all the ways in which postcards are evidence of the culture that created them and the specific dates. This was printed for not by the Type Company. This was printed by a French company for the Moet et Chandon Champagne vintner. And the image is beautiful Art Nouveau, and it's by the Czechoslovakian artist Alphonse Mucha. You see his signature way down on the bottom. This one is a Wiener Werkstatt postcard. The Wiener Werkstatt, so from 1903 to World War I, they produced specifically 925 art postcards. And this is the first time I'm showing you something in this presentation that were produced as art, as opposed to for any other purpose, not to document, not to sell, not to promote, but rather as an artistic expression. I have one other a little bit later in the presentation to show you from the Wiener Werkstatt. And from that, let's go back to her. We go here to the 1950s, and this postcard printed by the Type Company, which was commissioned by the manufacturer of these seat covers that you're seeing here. So the woman in the red is nobody we know. She is a model hired by the manufacturer of these seat covers, but obviously everything about it is indicative of the time that produced it. As is this, one of my favorite views of these anonymous. We don't know them now, but they're just in the summer sunshine in this public pool in those great bathing suits. This a little bit later, now we're in the early 1960s. And while this card is really kind of ugly, I think this is the first ugly one we've come upon, the color and the way it's designed and the format and the locket and everything about it's, again, very telling of the time that produced it. And finally, this one in this short series of sort of style and how what we see on postcards is indicative of time period is this, which was commissioned by the manufacturer of this furniture. So at the time, this was sort of the ideal family who might own this furniture, that lamp, that chair, that Davenport, what we would call now mid-century. And so even though it's just an advertising card promoting this, it's as important as any other advertising for product. Now I'm going to dip a little bit into what are referred to as real photo postcards. So I'm pulling away a little bit from the Type Company and to explain very quickly that a real photo postcard is different from a postcard printed by a printer. Everything we've seen up till now, with the exception of that Wiener Werkstatt card, that was printed, that's printed as an art print. Everything else was printed by color lithography that I've shown you so far. But in these early decades of the 20th century, Kodak and two other manufacturers did produce photosensitized paper in a 3.5 by 5.5 postcard size, pre-printed with the stamp box and the address lines on one side, ready for you, whoever you are, who actually had a camera and had darkroom capability to print whatever you wanted on the other side. So the resulting millions and millions of postcards printed by individuals as well as companies are called real photo postcards because they are actual photographs just printed on this 3.5 by 5.5 piece of cards of paper stock. So on them were often events. This is the collapse of a bridge in Ohio. This is a tornado in Omaha, Nebraska, right before Easter. This is the destruction of liquor in front of the Montgomery County Courthouse in Independence, Kansas in 1939 or 1913, pardon me, during Prohibition. Or things that were less time pegged and momentous and a little bit more just every day were captured in great detail. This is road construction crew. This is the interior of a tailor shop. In this wonderful view, and you can see this one because of the typeface that's used down there on the lower left-hand corner is printed by one of these companies that produced real photo postcards as opposed to an individual. And this is a wonderful detailed view of San Francisco's Chinatown. And it could also just be individuals. This, I mean, if we go back to Chinatown, this is crisp and clear, and as I said, the typeface shows that it was printed by a company whose stock and trade was real photo postcards, whereas this one is not quite so sharp and clear, and someone had a camera, and someone had bought some of this photosensitized paper, and somebody captured some rattlesnakes, and so all of that came together to present us this anonymous person, probably around 1910, and his rattlesnakes. But it could also be portrait images. And what I show you here are both portrait images and they're both real photo postcards. The one on the right-hand side is an example of what was a way of making a living back in these early 2 decades of the 20th century, that itinerant photographers would travel around to rural locations, not in New York, not in Chicago, but rural locations, and go into towns, stay in the town for, you know, a week or so, set up a small sort of tent shop or rent someplace on the main street to set up a shop and advertise that they were there and people could come and have their portraits done. And so that's what's on the right-hand side here. And this man you're looking at is my great-grandfather. And we know, this is the only one of these that came down in my family, but on the back, he wrote to my grandmother that that's what had happened. He wrote that photographer in town, I bought 10 of these. I don't remember exactly, but the message was exactly what I just described. He bought 10 of them and was sending, and he even enumerated 1 through 10, everyone he was sending these to. And I am sure that all of us, if we have any family archives at all, photo archives at all, look on the backs of some of them of these early portraits of our family, and they might just well be postcards that were captured in this way. So on the other side, on the left-hand side, that is my father. So that's my great-grandfather and then my father. So there's a generation skipped in there, but that's my father right before he shipped out overseas during World War II. Obviously, he's in New York on Rockefeller Center. But that's also a real photo postcard, and that was captured in an entirely different way, and one that we're all familiar with, like sitting on the blue moon down in Atlantic, or the half moon down in Atlantic City, that there'd be someone who had a concession on the top of Rockefeller Center to do exactly this. But this one, just to show you that all everybody's captured in real photo postcards is Mussolini. And I am going to read to you, you can follow along in that text there because it is written in English. And so this is written in 1921. And it says, this is a recent photograph of Mussolini, a strong face, but not, and underlined, the brutal one some caricatures make of it. Mussolini's mother taught him to read when he was 6. When he was 9, she insisted, notwithstanding his father's indifference, that he should be put into a boys' school. He had a few terms in a normal school at Bologna and a few in the university at Lausanne. He is a great student of history, political economy, and languages. Of these last, he speaks 4. And at 38, he is leading Europe, some say the world. And just fascinating to me, this. Obviously, it's a real photo postcard, undoubtedly published in thousands of copies of it. We don't know anything about the person who wrote this note. It's in English, which is interesting, not in any of the European languages. So can we think that it might be an American? We don't know. But nonetheless, there's something compelling to me and chilling as well about this message at this time about this man. And so postcards, because they blend the graphic with the trend, with the experience, with the message, are such powerful amalgams of all of that put together in this tiny 3.5 by 5.5 size. This is one of my favorite examples. And to just underscore that a little bit more, we returned to Paris. We were there in 1889, just a few minutes ago. This is more like around, I think, what does it say there? 1910. I can't read the thing on the bottom.
1910.
Yep. And a lot of stuff happened in 1910. We're in the Champs-Élysées and a wonderful puppet show, and what a great image this is just of that time and that place. But I go back to the Eiffel Tower a little bit and look at this postcard, not the back of the one you just saw, but this one was printed in 1907. So remember, 1907 was that transition year when we went from a back where you could only put your address in the stamp, and now this is what is called, and forever after, a divided back, where now you have what we use today: an area for the stamp, an area for the address, the whole back of the whole picture on one side, and then the area for the message. But what I love about these next three I'm going to show you is this. So this is 1907, Dearest Pearl. She's saying it was a clear day in Paris. We had a good time in the afternoon. We went to the very top of the La Tour Eiffel, and it was, Bob. So Bob is writing, he's having this experience, the same one from 1889. And then this one, which was sent in 1999. I'm writing to you from the clouds. We're at the top of the Eiffel Tower looking out at beautiful Paris as she spreads below us. And my point in showing all of these, from my description of the experience of the year of completion of the Eiffel Tower to 1907 to 1999, postcards arguably are the least changed communication device we have that's still actually going. That, in fact, just a couple of months ago, well, just a month and a half ago, my son and his girlfriend were out in the Black Hills, and they went to Mount Rushmore, and he bought a postcard and he sent it to his mother. And and not because I'm, love postcards, and this is part of what I go around speaking about, but rather that he's a 25-year-old young man and was having a cool experience in a cool spot, and he chose a postcard and sent it to me. And it was undoubtedly like the millions of others that have been sent from that spot over the years. And so back just a little bit to some wonderful examples of other aspects of culture that have been captured on postcards. This was printed in 1964, the year the Beatles came. Isn't that the year the Beatles came to on the Ed Sullivan Show? And then this one, this just promotes the band. This is actually a Tyke card, surprisingly. I'm a little surprised by the fact that this was printed by Kurt Tyke, but it was. Maybe there was an American promoter or something that somehow got to the Tyke company to print this. Then just 30 years later, in 1994, this is also a postcard. And it was published the year the Rolling Stones came out with their album entitled Voodoo Lounge. Absolutely no different from that, except obviously the look is different, but the reason is not different. And this, I will remark just a quick aside here that you notice this one is a different shape. And this is the first one I've shown you that's now, it's a 4x6 size as opposed to 3.5 by 5.5 size. And there was a moment after, right at the conclusion of World War II, when the standard postcard size transitioned to what was referred to later as the international size. And now they're generally that 4x6 size. Quick aside. I'm going to show you just a couple of examples of political postcards. This is an English example, encouraging you to vote conservative. Don't let those Labor people ruin it. Two American examples. This is published by the New York State Citizens for Eisenhower. And a little bit later by the Nixon campaign. And to put it on the other side and bring it home to Illinois, we've got one voting for Stevenson, showing the difference between what's going to happen if you vote conservative or vote liberal. One of my favorite political examples from the UK is this one of Tony Blair, because again, it's a warning about labor in the Labor Party in this instance. But I mean, you almost couldn't, you wouldn't even have to see the bottom of it to understand that somebody is vilified here and someone is a great danger. I just love this graphic so much. And then the final one I'm going to show you is this one. I don't always show this. Sometimes I have to be careful who I'm talking to, but I felt that Alan's Salon group could take this one. This one was printed at the very end of at the very beginning rather of 2016. So isn't that curious? I don't know anything about why it was printed, but you know, was prophetic. Little did we know, or maybe we knew, but others were ignoring. So postcards are still used to propagandize and to show something, whatever it is, whatever your something is, they're used in this way because they're graphic and they're impactful, they're powerful. I'm going to talk just a little bit about collecting. This is just an early postcard album. There were 1 million of them out there. Right around 1900, right at the turn of the century. It's referred to still by people who collect postcards as the golden age of postcards because really everybody collected them, whether you did it systematically or whether you did it just to have kind of a parlor album to look through when you had guests over, when you were at home on Sunday. So before, in a generation before, around the time of the Civil War, it would have been the stereopticon that you would have in the parlor to engage your visitors or to look yourself. But later, around the turn of the century, it was postcard albums. Postcard exchanges were actually very common especially in the United States, but also in Central Europe, in Germany and France. And this is an example of one in Alabama, where the whole purpose of this store is to purchase and exchange postcards. This is a little more common view of just kind of a stationery store, but you see in this kind of middle left-hand side, those Ferris wheel display rack of postcards and another one next to it. Postcards are just sort of everywhere and used very commonly for the most casual of communication. At that time, there were 2 posts in the day, the morning post and the afternoon post. So there are many, many thousands of examples of notes written on the back of postcards sent in the morning that say, come and pick me up at the train at 3, don't forget the eggs, you know, used almost in a kind of a text sort of way. So everyone was collecting postcards at the time, but still it's quite a collecting craze. It's much more systematic now. It's not at all casual by most people. Does anyone know who this man is? Besides Alan probably knows. Yes, Betty. It's Leonard Lauder, who is the chairman emeritus of the Estee Lauder companies and the eldest son of Estee Lauder, founder of Estee Lauder companies. And he's standing in front of a wonderful Cubist Picasso, one of a collection of Cubist works that he gave to the Metropolitan Museum a couple of years ago, that the then director of the Metropolitan called a transformative gift to the Metropolitan. He is obviously a collector of the most expensive high art, but he started as a postcard collector when he was a little boy. And he is still a postcard collector today. And yes, that's right. That's Miami, the Art Deco in Miami. And his family would go down to Florida in the wintertime and spend time there. And I don't think I had, except for this one, I don't have any postcards to share of the Florida, but Florida was just awash with postcards, especially in the mid-century, at the time that Leonard Lauder would have been down there as a little boy. So he started by collecting postcards when he was down there because he liked them graphically, not because he was documenting his time there, but he says today when he's interviewed that he liked them for their graphic nature. And so I'll show you just a little of what he collects today. So he collects, you know, Picasso and Braque and Leger, and he collects a lot of high art, but he also collects postcards, and he's on record in many interviews as saying that he loves his Picassos and his postcards in equal measure. It has nothing to do with the value of them. It has to do with documentation and with expression of culture and with aesthetics. He loves them both in equal measure. And he's, so some of what he collects are, he collects Wiener Werkstatt. You remember this lady from earlier in the presentation. The other one you see there is an Easter card that was designed by Josef Hoffmann, who was part of the Wiener Werkstatt. Sure. So you can see, obviously, those are Easter eggs. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Shapes of the eggs in there. So again, the Wiener Werkstatt cards were created just as art cards. He also collects Japanese cards. This is a beautiful Japanese art printed card, just of a country scene. This is printed for the Tournament of the Far Eastern Athletes, which was organized in 1912. Has a very early almost streamlined deco look to it. And this beautiful view of the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, which is a Frank Lloyd Wright designed building. Isn't that beautiful?
It was.
What'd you say?
I said it was.
It just was, yes. He also collects these curious things. Does anyone know what this is? Not the Titanic itself, but the postcard I'm showing. Is anyone familiar with that? So this is, as you see, it says woven in silk. And hark, if you will, in your mind's eye to decorative or military ribbons that have figurative weaving in them. So they have a design, or they have words woven in them, or the band of a hat that might have flowers that are woven in, or even a child's hair ribbon. Those are all woven on a jacquard loom. And at a certain, just for a short period of time, about 12 or 15 years, an English company called Stephen Graff got the idea of weaving pictures into these ribbons and then mounting them in a little mat that's 3.5 by 5.5 in size, and selling them as postcards. So what you've seen is a piece of woven ribbon, figuratively woven ribbon, that in this case shows the Titanic, and then it's set into this postcard frame. And then the back of it would have the address in the stamp box. Almost every ship that crossed the Atlantic in that first decade and a half had these postcards available for sale on them, including the Titanic. So here's an example of one that doesn't have a picture of the ship, but it has the picture of it's the Royal Majesty ship Baltic. Oh no, let me see. This is a Swedish ship, is that right? It's a Swedish ship and it's going to America. I think that's it. This hands across the sea expresses where the port of embarkation and the port of destination, and the hands across the sea, and the sort of international friendship that is implied by that transatlantic voyage. But that inset in that mat is woven in silk. You can see the back of that postcard. So he collects those. He collects views of the suffragette, women's right to vote movement approaching the 23rd Amendment. He collected real photo postcards of early missionaries as they went around rural America trying to kind of snake oil salesmen, if you will. And he collected Santa Clauses, which is quite interesting because, of course, Leonard Lauder's family is Jewish. And this one, I show this one simply because it's an unusual and valuable one, because Santa is in a purple robe as opposed to a red robe or a blue robe. It's very uncommon. So that's Leonard Lauder's collection. Just to go back to him for just a minute, he gave his Japanese collection to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston some years ago. There's two wonderful books written by the curator of that collection on his collection. It's just magnificent graphically, just magnificent. And then he also gave his Wiener Werkstatt postcards, the 925 postcards printed by the Wiener Werkstatt, to the Neue Gallery in New York City. If you've been there, that's his brother, what's his name? Ronald Lauder is the organizer of the Neue Gallery in New York City. And then he also gave a collection to the Tyke Archives. And that's why I show it, because I'm talking about collecting writ large, but anything I'm showing you here, and there's just a couple more examples, are collections that we added to that Tyke Industrial Archives. At a certain point, we began to grow the collecting mission of the archives to include anything related to postcards, any type of postcard published or produced by anyone in the world. And so we started to work with private collectors, and Leonard Lauder gave his collection to 3 institutions, and the Lake County Discovery Museum's Tyke Archives was one of them. Other collections within the Tyke Archives now that were not printed by the Kurt Tyke Company include a wonderful comprehensive collection of the 1933-34 Chicago World's Fair, the Century of Progress. I'm just showing you examples from them. Another collection, the Rich Juvenile Collection, named after the man who put it all together, of amusement parks, everything from Atlantic City to everything you can imagine, all amusement parks all around the world. There's also the James R. Powell Route 66 collection. This man collected every postcard he could find along the route of Route 66. I'm going to show you a couple of examples because I find them so charming. There's just kind of taking along Route 66, wonderful real photo postcards showing great detail here. This one's just, I don't know, it's just so pastel. It's looked like a bunch of Easter eggs parked in front of that what we would refer to now as mid-century charbroiled steakhouse. And then this one, you know, can you all see the way you're kind of covering my screen? Can you see what's written there? It says that it's a motorant, and that there's a coffee shop and a refined cocktail bar, and Fred Leskowski will play the organ on your request, whatever you want. You can stay nearby because there's an auto court. You can buy gas, Native American arts and crafts, and it's all there, you know, Winslow, Arizona. Just a wonderful card. And so bleak though, too. You know, you stop and this is the only thing on the landscape is this place, but it has everything. So you're okay. We can all get cocktails. So you're really okay. Okay, we're nearing the end in case you're worried. But I want to show you one other aspect. Now I'm going back to the Kurt Tyke Industrial Collection, because not only did this man save 15 examples of every postcard they printed, but they saved the art files that went into the creation of the postcard. And by art files, they would have, well, I'll explain through this. So this is the finished postcard for Kirk's Better Foods in Sioux Falls, South Dakota in the 1950s. So, you know, it's a beautiful card, kind of like Anytown, USA. But what was sent from Sioux Falls, South Dakota by Kirk's would have been a black and white photograph. And that's what the printers in Chicago would have to work with in order to do this. So there's a lot of back and forth between the client located wherever and the Tyke company that's going to print these things in Chicago based on this photograph and instructions that the client would give. So look at this for a minute and you'll look behind the bar there by the waitress. There's a rag on the floor. The bus cart's right there at the end. We have, there's some people standing by the door. You notice also that the wall on the right-hand side is blank. That figures in here in just a minute. And so in Chicago, we get this picture, and then the client is going to describe anything that they want changed. So this is what I'm going to show you is the writing on the back of this photograph. that will give some of the changes that the client Kirk wants to have made, and then has my favorite instruction at the very bottom. It says, remove farmer at door. I love that. The rest of it is all like, okay, the ceiling is dark green, the walls are light green, the seats are buff, and like, it's kind of describing the colors so the printer knows what colors to use. But remove farmer at door is one of my favorites. And another one we see in these type company instructions all the time, and I always thought I would use it as a title for a book if I ever wrote about this, is put clouds in sky. No definite article. It wouldn't say the sky. It was just such a great poetic turn of phrase to me. Put clouds in sky. And you see that all the time on the backs of these photographs. If there were no clouds, you want a blue sky and puffy clouds, but that remove farmer at door. And sure enough, he's gone. Now you're looking at the retouched photograph where they're cropping it up. So you don't see the cloth that's fallen on the ground. You don't see the bus tray. The farmer's gone. I don't know why they take farmers out of coffee shops in Sioux Falls, South Dakota in 1953. I don't know what that's about. But look at the wall too, that now on the wall is wallpaper. And we can only assume that they were maybe redoing Kirk's or were about to put up new wallpaper, because in the art file, we actually have a piece of the wallpaper. This was also common. These files were large folders and everything was in it. The negative, the photograph, the instructions, very often pieces of things, wallpaper, naugahyde, strips of aluminum, anything that the customer wanted the type printers to understand in real terms. And so this is one example of 110,000 of these envelopes that were still maintained by the company and made it all the way to now to the Newberry Library. So I'm dipping back in very quickly. This is where I pulled up a few views of Los Angeles. Do we have anyone from Los Angeles this afternoon? We do. Yay, I picked some up from you. Ellen said you'd be with us. So this is just Elgin, Illinois. It's just a great view of a motel. I love it in particular because it shows the interiors. Going back to that bank interior in Pullman, that picture postcards are often the only images that we have of some of these common interiors.
Clouds in sky.
Yeah, what? Yeah.
Yeah, the clouds.
This is a great view of Marshall Field's, the Marshall Field's store. Just a palace of commerce as was common in those days. This is one of my favorite views of Brooklyn. This is a pre-1907 card, and the way you can tell is that space on the extreme right-hand side of the card that is intended for your message. So sometimes, you remember all the way back to that Eiffel Tower card that had that big space for the message. This one just has a smaller space, and that was very common by about 1904, 1905. This was much more common design, even though you still couldn't write on the address side. But I love this with those pastel clouds and the low profile of the buildings. It's just a beautiful image. Now we're in LA, aren't we? I mean, I was looking for my LA person this afternoon. I was looking for something really LA, and this is a good one, as well as this, which is an interior of this, it's just super terrific. Any minute, Cary Grant's going to walk in from the men's room, and the cigarette girls are going to come in. Postcards in these periods, the 1950s, early 1960s, were used to advertise places like this with great regularity all around the country, and do remain some of our only images of this kind of interior, even though it's not 1910, but it's no less fabulous. The Los Angeles International Airport, great image from the 60s. I show you two here.
Highland Park.
This is Highland Park. This is a view of the golf course at the Exmoor Country Club. And the reason I show it, because it's kind of if you forgive me if I'm treading on anyone's Highland Park toes, but it's not that interesting of a view. There's no real focal point. It is a view of the course. and it's not particularly crisp or particularly compelling. But when I got this image from the archivist at the Exmoor Club, he told me what's going on in this is example of the documentary power of these early picture postcards. Because do you see in the middle distance there, those long kind of ridges? That is called a copse, even though it's spelled the same way as a little woodland, C-O-P-S-E. And it was an early type of hazard design in golf course design. And this was, I think it was taken in 1912, if memory serves. And the following year, and it was going out of style, this copse hazard was going out of style at that time. And by the following year, this course had changed and they had taken these copse hazards out of the course at Exmoor. Now, to any of us, that doesn't make a bit of difference. But to someone who studies the history of golf course design, or anything, you name it. I just use this as an example of how these common images of commonplace that were not momentous are so important to our understanding whatever minutia of 20th century culture a person is studying. So I think there's the detail of that postcard. It just kind of closed in on that shot. So postcards, aren't they wonderful? This is my wonderful postcard, the last couple of slides. I didn't even talk about those that are just designed because they're fabulous and whimsical. This is just a great, about 1905, real photo postcard, hand painted, to be just adorable. Or these are now referred to by collectors as novelty cards. So something moves on them, or something is affixed to them, or they have googly eyes, or there's something dimensional about the cards. This one has real feathers attached to it and would have been sent and was sent through the mail. And just to impress on all of us that everyone sends postcards, this postcard was sent from Pablo Picasso to the artist and critic Guillaume Apollinaire in 1907. And he sent many postcards, Picasso to Apollinaire, in these early decades. And isn't this fabulous? It's exactly Picasso in 1906, 1907. And then this one just 10 years later, 1918, from Picasso to Apollinaire. Are those not absolutely fabulous?
Fabulous.
So my son sent one from the Black Hills 2 months ago. Not as fabulous, but still, it's the connection between experience, between human relationship, between the graphic and the written, that is so compelling about postcards. I love this one. It's the penultimate one in my presentation, because yes, large letter postcards are so iconic that now there's one from Narnia. The Kingdom of Aslan, which I think is just recently printed a couple of years ago. And then going into the future, this is an artist created card, and I have not even touched on the hundreds of thousands of images that on postcards that are made by artists as art and are taking us into the 21st century. So that's all of my remarks. Thank you so much for your patience.
It was great fun.
I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to any postcard you want.
That was fabulous. That's Barbara here. I am going to excuse myself for 2 seconds because I have my grandmother's album from her trip to Europe in 1920, whatever, and I want to see what's in it. It might be of interest to you. Hold on.
So, Katherine,
Yes.
Betty here. One is, I have a couple questions. One, on the early postcards that you showed that were watercolored, were those artists recognized as the ones?
What was it?
Any of the early ones that were just not hand-colored photographs, but actual watercolor renderings of places. There was one of the Chicago World's Fair that you showed that was a architectural watercolor drawing of the site.
Okay. Yeah, I have to
And
go.
I was wondering if those artists got recognized at any time. I mean, seeing as how these have become collectibles, I was curious about the kind
Yes.
of trained artists who did these amazing pictures.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, oops, I think I went too fast.
No, go back a little further.
I know I'm trying. It's
Oh,
not letting me. There we go.
oh, it's not keeping up with
just-
your speed.
I was asking too much of there.
There, that one. Like that,
Mhm.
was that signed by an artist somewhere? It's
This
just such a
one-
beautiful rendering.
It is, and the artists of these, and artists, I didn't even touch on that. There's so much I didn't touch on because an artist created cards are very much collected and are many of them very, very valuable. So sometimes an artist is like this person is not known. I mean, this person may be known, the person who designed this may be known, or they may not be known. I don't know the name of this person. This is a French example.
Yeah.
It is signed there on the bottom. There is a signature. And many people who collect postcards systematically do collect the work of specific artists, known artists, and Mucha was one of them. Alphonse Mucha designed, the one that I showed, the Moet et Chandon card, was he was working there as a designer for that company, but he also designed postcards, as art postcards, and those are highly valuable generally, especially someone like Mucha. But yeah, if you, gosh, I mean, there's so that's just the tip of the iceberg.
And I had one more question, was that when you showed the two Wiener Werkstatt pictures from the Lauder collection, who's the artist who did the woman's head? Was that Hoffman as well?
I do not think so. I don't know. I could
doesn't look like Hoffman.
It's not Hoffman. I have another one that I show sometimes in my presentation of from Moritz Jung, Man of Letters. That's in 1911. It's in his Viennese Cafe series. You can look that up actually. It's Moritz Jung, and it's the Viennese Cafe is the series. And the particular one I show is called Man of Letters, but that's a Wiener Werkstatt card. If you go online and just look for Wiener Werkstatt postcards, you will find the 925 postcards. And I'm sure there's a Wikipedia article, and that's and so you'll likely find that woman and be able to, I'm sorry, I don't know the
that's okay.
artist, but it would have been one of those associated with the Werkstatt.
And when you said that, I'm sorry, I'm sort of hogging all my questions at once. When you said that they were not done in the offset manner, some of them were, as you said, they were produced as art cards.
Oh, yes.
Like the Japanese prints, were those silk screen or wood cuts or?
Both of those, they could be silk screens. Let's see, the Japanese one, I think.
That's so beautiful.
Trying to think, it's just beautiful. The countryside view. Trying to think if that one is maybe a silk screen. I'll find it here. Yes, I mean, many of the printing techniques were used and still are used today to create, there we had those two.
There it was. Yeah,
They're gorgeous.
Those were fabulous.
Just
that monogram there might be an artist's signature, and I don't recognize it.
Down there on the bottom, lower left.
Yeah,
well, that's
a little yellow egg.
Yeah.
Oh, that one was the Hoffman, but on the woman there's a square like a seal.
Yes,
like a monogram. That's probably
like
some
a Chinese.
I don't recognize.
Like a
But
Chinese.
this is so beautiful.
There's a great deal written about those 925 postcards. So if you're interested in just the postcards that were created through the Wiener Werkstatt, there's a lot written about it, and some, to my knowledge, a couple of beautifully illustrated books. the book that the Museum of Fine Arts Boston produced about Lauder's Japanese collection is absolutely stunning. I
Yeah,
mean, if you like this at all, I recommend buying that book because it's just amazing. Not only did he give that collection to them, he endowed a curatorial position to care for that collection because, you know, he's the 17th richest person in the world, so he can do those fun things.
yeah,
But
we lost a curator from the Art Institute of Chicago to his endowed collection of the Cubist and early modern things.
oh,
Stephanie D'Alessandro left the Art Institute of Chicago to become the Lauder curator at the Met.
well, yes, he endowed a position there that I didn't know about that transition. But that's the good thing about Mr. Lauder. He, through this experience, he and I have become, I wouldn't say friends, but we've met for coffee. We've met a few times and we do correspond. Whenever I'm in New York, I let him know, and he's, you know, never available, but he always thinks he'll be there. But now he's getting quite old. I think he's well into his 80, or maybe he's 80, early 80s. Anyway,
That's
but
not
he
surprising.
loves, he loves, he, he still collects postcards very actively. And he's just a fascinating, very generous man with his time. And the thing that I appreciate about him is he does endow these positions. He gives not only the collection worth a gazillion dollars, but he also gives the money to support the collection, to interpret the collection, to provide access to the collections, to publish about the collection. He really understands it. He's his thinking about what he gives to museums is fully formed, I would say. Anyway.
Can we go back to the group screen? I think you have to
Sure.
do it,
What do I have to
Catherine.
do here? Let's see. Okay, I have to stop the share.
I want to know, Joseph, what were you holding up?
Yeah, Alex knows this friend of mine, Edward Gomez, who's a great writer for Hyperallergic and Raw Vision, but he's an artist as well.
Oh,
And he always sends postcards. He prefers to send postcards, and I always he's an outsider artist specialist. He's a specialist in outsider art. So he curates it, and sometimes I'll just get an explosion, or sometimes I'll get something very graphic, or sometimes sometimes they come in themes. But I have my own art gallery of his artworks.
So, if I may jump in on that, one time about 2 years ago, Alan, I just started sending him, I had a bunch of, wasn't it Japanese postcards, a whole box of them.
Yep.
And I just started sending Alan a postcard every day.
Yes.
And it was wasn't it fun? Because I would wake up and I'd send Alan a postcard. And for quite a while, you got 57 postcards or something, one a day.
Right,
I
but
just
put
think
good
they're the
weather.
most charming way to communicate, you know,
Yeah.
just like you're saying, Joseph.
Yeah.
It's just, why
I
not?
love getting these. How could you not love getting this in the mail? You know, when it's always written in a crazy way in the back, and sometimes he'll have it stamped, or, you know, and he's always got the most mundane things beautiful, a really long address in 3 different languages, you know, in the back, so I can make sure I can mail something back to him, you know.
and I've got my grandmother's 1922
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
album, and there are lots of postcards in here,
Wow.
and some photography. I mean the interior of palaces, and a world that doesn't look like this anymore. But and my grandmother was the type, there's lots of pictures of people, and she was a list maker. And after her death, Mom and my aunt were going through a drawer, and they find, you know, an end with pictures all labeled. And then there was a thick envelope that said pictures of people whose names I don't remember.
Always, yeah, yeah.
Oh, that would make a
That's
great
great.
exhibition, wouldn't it? Pictures of people whose names I don't remember.
I love
Brain
that
too short to
concept.
save.
Catherine, do you think something's happening now similar with one form of social media or another? Or do you think this is sort of a uniquely pre-digital expression? And by that, I mean, like, do you think some of the things that you are attributing to postcards, chronicling the times inadvertently, that kind of thing, do you think it's happening in another way?
I think any of us could answer that, could at least muse on that question. One of the points that I try to make in my presentation is the consistency of the reason why postcards are used and the way I think that technologically our culture is moving so rapidly now and changing so rapidly that difficult almost to, I mean, certainly we're the most documented generations, just visually, that every time you go out and have eggs and the hash browns look crispy, you take a picture, so we're documenting ourselves in an unprecedented amount, whether that's just going to change, by 3 years from now, something else will, but postcards, any of us here could muse on that and think a little bit about that confluence of experience and communication and the graphic. But I think that's what, to me, and so there's certain aspects of social media that do include that, that confluence of communication, the written with the visual, with the experience sometimes, but I don't know if it's a one-to-one comparison.
But they're not material. I mean, I think that's the problem with, much as I love digital photography and digital imagery, that it's not, there's no materiality. So like my big India project, was based on finding, 70 years later, 4x5 negatives and vintage prints. Well, what am I going to do? Hold up a hard drive? You're going to find this, somewhere in a junk shop. You're going to find a box of little thumb drives. I mean,
I can hold one up.
right. But years from now, we won't even have the technology. The technology will have moved beyond that.
Yeah.
So you won't even be able to read it. So I think we're at this crossroads, of from analog to digital, where there are fabulous things with digital. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's more accurate in many ways, but it doesn't leave you with that solid thing that you hold in your hand.
It's not tactile.
It's not tactile. It's not material.
Diane, wanna unmute yourself?
Yeah, there's someone way down here. Yeah.
So when I was a kid, the phone wasn't really an option for me. The phone was for my parents and their business and their group of friends, and we had to find something else to do. So my grandmother my grandparents had newspapers. And when they moved to Florida and started with their newspapers down there, they were traveling extensively through Florida. This was in the 50s. And so my grandmother found it she wanted to be a part of our lives. She had 32 grandchildren.
Oof.
And I was the oldest of 7 children. So my grandmother decided that we were going to get a postcard every week. So wherever they went, she bought up the postcards. Now, in my mind, I had no concept of the other 31 grandchildren, but all I knew was that I got a postcard from my grandmother every week with a substantial message. She wrote small. You had to keep turning it like this because she wrote all the way around, and finally, love grandma. And I felt like I was loved.
Sure.
And that was my connection to my grandmother. And I had a deep connection to my grandmother because of those postcards. And they were beautiful. I remember just she loved St. Augustine, and there were pictures of the beach in Daytona and Miami and orange groves, and they were a lot of pastels and colors, and always that dream of a sunny place where it was like this in the wintertime here. But I saved every letter I ever got my whole life, but I sadly did not save all of these. I would have had an amazing collection because I got one every week, but I still have some. But I think every one of us probably has some kind of a story. Didn't you all get postcards from your grandparents? And when my grandparents retired, they traveled the world and never stopped traveling. So I got postcards from all over the world from my grandparents. But anyway.
I think the peak for me when I was in Africa in 69, I got to Timbuktu. And you better believe I sent everybody I knew a postcard. And what we were told was to make sure you stood at the post office and watched them frank the stamp so that it couldn't be taken off and used again. But I sent lots of postcards in the late 60s.
We all did when we traveled.
Everybody did.
You'd
Right.
always buy a stock on your first day so that they would get there before you got home.
Merle?
Right.
Thank you, Catherine. I am totally fascinated by your presentation. I have to admit it's my own limitation, I think, but I've never considered the breadth of a historical record that a collection of postcards could represent. I only think in terms of individual cards that I either received or I sent. And such a much more vast kind of consideration. So thank you. Building on Diane's point, when I was a child and in my early 20s and 30s, it was a requirement that if you took a trip, you sent everybody postcards. I mean, it was expected. I loved receiving them. It was for me, a nuisance to send them when I'd go on a trip because there were so many people and it took so much time. I remember that whole process. But I'm a little saddened now that I almost never get postcards anymore because people, if they're traveling, will take a picture and just email it or text it. And it's a whole other thing. Now I have, to Alan's point, on a few occasions, but really a few, taken those images from the text and printed them out. But it's still not the same thing. You know, it's a sort of flimsy piece of paper and there's no personal note and so on and so forth. But the images are beautiful. It's kind of sad. From a purely commercial point of view, I wonder, Catherine, has the industry of printing postcards declined because of all the electronic options?
Well, certainly it's declined from the heyday for sure, but it's still very much alive, which is wonderful, actually. You know, that my son can go to Mount Rushmore and buy a postcard and send it to his mother, you know. So I think it's narrowed. I guess I'll say that. You cannot go into most small towns and you can sometimes find an illustration of a street view, or maybe there's a park that the town likes and thinks of as kind of a central place to them. So maybe a local artist has done a sketch and then the local historical society has printed them as a series, but you cannot really find these local views anymore. So it's narrowed to just, well, two things, sort of the art postcards and then the experience postcards that you can still buy if you go to some fabulous place. Oh, you're leaving.
I just want to share my most memorable postcard, which I will keep forever. It's my treasure. I bought in Japan in 1970, and it's a photograph of two enormous sumo wrestlers, which in itself is kind of fun, but when you turn it over, there is text describing the photo, and the words are, two wrestlers emulating Tritch. Nobody ever knew what that meant, but we all laughed so much about it. And it's just the fact that it stuck with me in my brain. I mean, it's
Emulating what? Emulating what?
Tridge.
Spell?
Trich. Have no idea. I've shown
R-I-C-H.
it to all kinds of people. Nobody has any idea what it means.
Oh, I think she has a question. Oh, she has a postcard.
Yeah, what Betty said, every time we went on vacation, I sent postcards, please don't laugh, to my dog. On the he would have it with a stamp from the place. Obviously, she read them with delight. And then I when we were in Bora Bora once, but look, they're out of wooden. So I didn't post them because I was afraid I would never get them. I never ever saw wooden postcards. I thought they were so cute. So, I mean, it's not like I collect. I have postcards for the last 20 years that I've sent to myself, technically. I enjoy that. But my most favorite thing was what Diane said. When my father first came to America in the 60s, he had sent my sister and I 2 cards. And I remember the card. He went to Atlanta because my uncle lived there. So it was just a picture of apples growing on a tree. And to me, that was America. Oh my God, people pick apples. I didn't know what that was. And so years later, about 3 years ago, I took my children apple picking by up north. But it's because of that postcard. What kind of wisdom memory you have from them. I wish I had that. Maybe my mother has it. I'll ask her. But that's what I received from America with that stamp. It was just a postcard of apples on a tree.
So
And
funny.
it's really lovely that that's the memory that brought back from your presentation. I loved it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
As part of our business, we used to distribute Chicago postcards, images of Chicago. I don't know who printed them, but it was part of our distribution business. I still remember the little cubby hole in the warehouse where the postcards were.
That's interesting.
Betty?
I am.
Go ahead, Mara. Mara never says anything, so if she's got her hand up, I want to hear what she has to
Yeah,
say.
but she just disappeared on us. Okay.
I'm here. Thank you, Betty. I know I'm hopeless at speaking, but anyway, one day I had a new neighbor and there was a postcard poking under my door, left halfway in and halfway out. That was the way he knew whether I had picked it up or not. And this is, I don't know how many years he's lived here, but we share a hallway and we call it the jetway because one of us is always traveling somewhere, or we used to be. And we always leave each other postcards before we go, when we come back, anytime between. It's so sweet. And he has a stamp collection and he puts old stamps on his cards that are marvelous from all over the world. It's just great.
Sounds like a flirtation.
No,
I was going to ask you if you ever in your postcard curating, Catherine, if you ever met an art postcard maker named Sarah Jane Avedon.
Oh, certainly. Sarah
She was
Jane.
my good friend. This is one of hers.
Ah.
The late Sarah Jane. And, and it was so fitting for me to have this on a shelf here in Santa Monica because I'm near the sea, obviously. But she would collect, for those of you who didn't know Sarah Jane, she collected old maps and then she would do the rickrack design, stitching around the edges. And then she bought all these fabulous stamps from wherever and would then emboss them with a saying that fit. And I actually found this, to me, was a mysterious place until finally, with the help of Google, I Googled several of the names of the places on the map together and realized it was somewhere near Chesapeake Bay. But anyway, so you knew Sarah Jane.
Yes, quite well. She, it's a long story. I don't, but
we should
she was one of the artists that contributed. For quite a while, we did something called the Postcard Art Competition Exhibition.
Right, I knew she was in that. I wasn't sure it was under your auspices, so yes.
Yes, we devised that, and it challenged artists from anywhere in the world to design new postcards. Had to be in a 4x6 format, and it had to be reproducible, but otherwise the world's your limit. And Sarah Jane was one of the artists that contributed extensively to that. She passed away of cancer about
Right.
10 years ago, maybe 8 or 10, 8.
Probably more than that. Yeah.
But
Sad. She was young.
too young. Yep. But she's wonderful. And artists, not only do artists design postcards like Sarah Jane, but someone mentioned, I think it was you, Joseph, when you were showing the cards that your friend sends to you. But well, the example that comes to mind just off the top of my head is that Dale Chihuly, the glass artist, has been a postcard collector for his adult life. And one of the types of images he collects, you might relates to his work, and that is of glass garden structures. So just views of like the or the White Palace or something like that, just glass garden structures. But artists and architects very much would go on their travels and from an inspirational point of view, collect postcards, not to send to other people, but to kind of amass a visual
Record.
inspiration file.
Yeah.
The one type of postcard that we did not collect at the Tyke Archives once we started to add to the industrial collection is we never collected postcards, reproductions of artwork printed by museums. We did not do that. We would collect views of museum galleries because that was different. It had sort of a documentary thing. That was the one type of postcard that we did not collect. And yet all of us who are interested in the humanities and any of us who are artists ourselves, you can't hardly walk into a museum without buying at least one postcard of something that
and the postcards, many of the postcards in this 100-year-old album are of works of art in museums.
Yeah, we all have them.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to tell you about I think my favorite postcard that I have. So it is a picture of a Caribbean scene. So there are palm trees and there's the ocean and there's the setting sun and it's really quite beautiful. And when you turn it over, it says, "A beautiful Caribbean scene. Check where you have seen it." And then it has all the different places.
Oh,
check
great.
off where you have seen it.
That's wonderful.
Alan, that's actually a type of card. Those are called checklist cards.
Checklist cards.
They are called checklist cards by the printers. Tyke printed probably a couple hundred, maybe more varieties of checklist cards. And that would be something that the salesman who had a sample book would go to, you name it, Santa Monica, and they'd pull out this huge sample book of all the different things that a Five and Dime could order or any kind of venue could order, and checklist cards were among them. And they were very high, had a very high sales success in the sort of 1940s, 50s, 60s.
I mean,
50s maybe.
I mean, I just love the whole thing that, in the discussion of whether, a photograph is real, whether it's objective. And then, right. And then there you have an image that, right. So first of all, it's not life, it's a thing. And then it's not the real thing. It's just an approximation of so it was like levels and levels and levels of ridiculous meaning. I loved it. I just loved it.
So tell me, of all of the cards I presented, what was each one of you say, what was your favorite one that you loved the most, like graphically or in any way?
The lady with the hat and the beautiful velvet coat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Barbara, I could see you in that coat.
And the hat.
Anybody else, Mara?
I think I like the Japanese ones with the clouds around the top, the very narrow one.
Oh yeah.
Picasso.
What, Mara?
The Picasso drawings.
Oh
yeah.
Amazing.
Definitely.
Amazing.
The last one you did, the one with the artist drawing.
Yes.
I love that one because of the stamp. It had one of the Elgin marble for the stamp. The body of the river Ilissos. I think it's a beautiful sculpture, and that's the drawing in the stamp. That's the one I love best.
Interesting.
The chair in that one. It looks like the chair in Van Gogh's bedroom.
Yes, it does,
Yeah.
Betty.
Oh, yeah.
Donna, Penelope.
So I have a sort of tangential question. You are a Rhodes Scholar now for the Illinois Humanities Council. You're on
Yeah.
the roster now. I did that for about 10 years, talking
Yeah.
about American cookbooks and culture. Have you done it in the before times? And are you doing it now? Have you, who's calling in for your presentations now?
Oh, well, for 2021, I've done it since 2019. So this is my third year, and they're all virtual for 2021. I do it just like I did this afternoon. So I have one on the 24th, and it'll be very similar to this. It's that one's to a historical society, but Penelope, you know, it's public libraries and any sort of publicly available venue. It was very, very fun to go around Illinois.
Katherine, you've only been giving talks for 2 years?
Well, I've been giving talks for a long time.
Yeah, gosh.
But through Illinois Humanities, just
Sorry. I'm like, my gosh. Yeah. How could you have kept quiet for so long?
Well, and the Illinois Humanities Council takes you to, I mean, I spoke, and I'm sure you have too, in towns that didn't break 1,000 in population. And we were the only game in town. I once calculated that if I had the percentage of population audience in Chicago that I'd had in Marshall, Illinois, you would have required a stadium for 25,000 people. Literally, that's how popular they are. Did you like doing that too?
Oh, it's just wonderful because you never, you know, you go to Homer, Illinois, and you don't even know where it is. And then all of a sudden there you are, and it's a lot of fun.
And are you able to connect well on Zoom with people? Does that work for you?
Yeah, it's not as fun for me. It's easy. It's certainly easier because you just sit in your kitchen like I'm doing, but it's not nearly as fun. It's not as fun.
Okay, thank you. So that was
there's if anyone is interested, I think I did send this to Barbara, but I can send it again. There's as part of the Terra Foundation for American Art sponsors something called Art Design Chicago. And I don't think it was last year. It wasn't last year because last year was, you know, not the before times, but it was the previous year. I spoke on a panel of 3 people about postcards. It was at the Newberry, but it was through the Terra Foundation. And that was recorded. And it's a really interesting panel, I think. You'll get pretty much what I presented today. And then there are 2 other presenters, one on real photo postcards and another one from the, what is it? The Brown, I can't think of the name of it. It's associated with the Art Institute. The Robert Brown? No.
Roger Brown.
Roger Brown, the Roger Brown Studio. So she's the curator there, and she talks about artists as inspired by postcards and using postcards in their work, and Roger Brown doing that. And so there's these 3 short presentations, and then there's a panel discussion, and it's pretty interesting. I can send the link to Barbara and she can send it out.
You know, the emails that I've sent includes everybody's address.
So I can do it to everybody. If
I can do it or you can do it. My pleasure.
It's just interesting to hear these other 2 speakers speak as well. And then the panel at the end, you know, there's some interesting stuff that comes out always in a panel.
Betty?
So Katherine, I'm a postcard collector.
Oh, now we know.
But now my secret is out, but only very specifically. I had a friend, it was actually the friend who introduced me to Sarah Jane, both of whom sadly are now deceased. But my friend Lois and I, over a period of maybe 20 some odd years or more, we were such close friends, we would send each other 2 girlfriend cards.
Oh.
I have thousands of them, and Lois's daughter has the other thousands of them. And if you'd be willing, I'd love to talk to you offline about possibly finding a way to publish them and our story.
Sure. I mean, to the extent
I would not take up this group's time doing that, but if you would mind if I contacted you.
Joseph, bye.
Bye,
Hope we get a
Joseph.
hope we get another
Bye.
postcard soon.
I gotta get going. Talk to you later.
Yeah.
Actually, Sarah Jane got into the act because she said, "You two are sending cards. I'm going to find 3 girl cards." So now we had a subset of 3 girl cards. And then after she died, Sarah Jane's husband gave me a whole album of all the cards she had been waiting to send.
Oh,
So I have these, those file storage boxes. I must have 2 that are filled to the brim, uncurated, just there,
Yeah.
plus all the ones I never got to send. And then of course, my friend's daughter has all of these. And we've been, she and I, the daughter and I have been talking for years about, oh, we've got to curate these. We've got to, write a book, tell the story, whatever. So if there's a way.
I'll send I guess I have all the email that you sent, Barbara. I can sort out yours, Betty, and just send you an email directly. We can kind of get in
I
touch.
would love that. I think that would be really fun to talk to you about it.
Betty?
Thank you so much for offering your time.
Betty, Betty, as a first step in whatever becomes of your project, a book or whatever, maybe you could prepare a short talk for the salon.
I would love to, but it wouldn't happen before I get back to Chicago because all of my postcards, which I would need to photograph for it.
that's quite all right. Even vaccinated, we're not going anywhere.
Where are we going?
I would love to do that, and maybe.
Fabulous idea.
Great idea.
Anyway,
Katherine, you'll have to come to that presentation.
of course.
I have a question about the Newberry postcard Ferris wheel. Do you know the history of it, like where it's lived in its life before it wound up at the Newberry?
Yeah, it came from us. I mean, we collected that. And
Okay.
what she's referring to, do you guys remember the interior real photo postcard of that sort of stationery store? And I pointed out the Ferris wheel display rack. One of our private collectors lives in Washington, D.C. John Monroe is his name. He collected that for us before the collection went to the Newberry. The collection only went to the Newberry a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's recent.
So that is just a fabulous piece, and he gave it to us, and then it was right about a year before we gave the collection on to the Newberry. And then it is just such a fabulous object that the gentleman who gave it paid to have it conserved. And but we don't really know very much about it. They're
far better than the spinners.
They come on the market. Yeah, it does spin, but it spins
But it's not these.
It doesn't spin. It spins like a Ferris wheel. And one of the it was exciting when we got that real photo postcard with the interior of the stationery store with that display rack in the store. Yeah. That was a good find to match those 2 up. But we don't know anything else really about it. It's just a fabulous object. Like so many.
What are you looking for these days, Katherine? If it fell into your lap, what would you want to fall into your lap?
I don't know. I don't work for the Newberry. I work for the Forest Preserve District, and I know that right now when we gave it to them, they were just sort of overwhelmed with trying to, figure it out and transfer it. And then about a year after they received it, they named postcards as their 11th core collection, right up with early modern drama or whatever the other collections are. And that warmed the cockles of my heart. I must tell you that kind of legitimized everything that you were saying. Everything that you were saying. Is it Merle? Everything that you were saying about not thinking about postcards. They're so ubiquitous. They're everywhere. We all understand them. We all have them. We've all gotten them. We all have a story. But what I try to show in my presentation is that they really have played and continue to play, but have played a significant role in the development of 20th century visual documentation and culture, that they're expressive of high art, but they're also, like that guy with the 2 rattlesnakes there. Almost everything that happened in the 20th century was somehow recorded in this one 3.5 by 5.5 piece of paper that also passed through somebody's hands and was used in a communal sort of way. So that's what I try to do. What the Newberry is looking for right now, I really don't know. I really don't know. I'm in pretty constant communication with them when things come up, but I've sort of passed it on.
Was part of the collection the naughty postcards from seaside England?
That came out of left field there, Barbara. Let's see the other album now, shall we?
No, this is Europe, not England.
I'm kidding.
I've always been fascinated by those, and it seems to me that's a whole field of collecting within the collecting.
Oh yes, I used to go quite regularly to the New York Postcard Club spring show, and there was one of the dealers there. He specialized in erotica, and that's what he specialized in. You go over to his booth. I cannot remember his name, but he sort of looked the part too. He just sort of looked
sleazy.
I don't mean with breast. I don't mean that, but he looked kind of just ever so slightly underground, a little cool, a little edgy, a little mysterious. Like he didn't want you to totally know what happened when he went home with his postcards. And I don't know. he was an interesting guy. I mean, I bought things from him, not erotica per se, but he also had, he touched on other things like just odd things. And I sort of liked odd things and still do. But yes, erotic postcards are a whole other aspect that we did not collect. I have to say that we didn't collect. And it wasn't a decision it wasn't a bridge that we ever came to. Nobody ever offered us a collection. We almost never bought anything. Everything to put together this magnificent collection, it was all gifts that came from either private collectors so we just never crossed that bridge or had to make that decision. Maybe the Newberry has them now, I don't know.
That brings up an interesting question of what you can send through the mail. Because given the kind of sort of primness that is inherent in American culture, I suspect that if it's truly erotic,
it wouldn't make it.
It's not going to make it through the mail.
Unless it's in an envelope.
Unless it's in an envelope, which kind of defeats the purpose of a postcard.
Katherine, in England, I don't know if it was in the States, but the society women, and in France, the demi-mondaine, all posed for postcards. I think there were pictorial images of them being divine. Were those postcards, do they surface anywhere? Are they part of collections?
Probably.
Well, there's carte de visite.
That's different.
It is different, but I was looking at it and I was thinking that in some ways that was a precursor of a postcard, in that it was a record of people or where you were that you sent. And I guess the Civil War was its apotheosis.
I think that the carte de visite are, I think if we were looking at the family tree of communication through images in the 20th century, the carte de visite would be on a dotted line to postcards. That's how I see it. That it's a way of recording, in this case, self expressed in the person or expressed in the person and their environment, and then codified on something that approximates the size of the postcard. They weren't sent through the mail in quite the same way. So I think it's part of, lithography and then chromolithography and then transmission of images and the speed of transmission and the ability to record that leads all the way up to our eggs and the crispy hash browns. It's sort of how are we recording ourselves as the culture writ large, as the individual, as the town, as the community, or even as the particular sub-interest like erotica. How are we creating this great image of ourselves over time? So I see it, I guess, since you're asking, I'm talking out of whole cloth here, but I see it on the family tree of images. It's on a dotted line to postcards, but it's not like direct.
Okay.
That's how I see it. But postcards prevail, don't they? We still all love getting them, and I do. I still send Alan a postcard once in a while,
I haven't received a postcard in years.
I
Well,
haven't
I'm
either.
going to send you all postcards. If you send me your addresses, I promise you that I will pick out some fabulous postcards.
Because it's a marvelous
So
way
much
for
fun.
all of us to communicate in a slow manner rather
Yes.
than.
Yes.
Of course, when Catherine sent me all of those postcards, she would write a single letter on
Oh,
one
yeah.
postcard. And, then it was telling a whole, story. However, given our postal service, they wouldn't come in the right sequence. So I would get like an R and an S, and I'd have to wait for whatever was in between the R and the S. And I'm still missing a couple. So I have things laid out, and then it's like, wait, there are holes. So they're in somebody's basement, a storeroom of the US Postal Service. But I
never did receive my vote by mail ballot.
Oh.
Yeah,
that's a
Oh,
fun.
you never got it?
I forgot about doing that.
I went in and voted in person because I wasn't not voting, but that has never shown up.
What Ellen's describing about sending like a message on, that's a really fun thing to do if you have a niece or anybody in your life that it's just a fun thing to do, to start sending them a message little by little. You can put a word on each postcard, or you can put just a letter on each postcard, and they eventually have to assemble the entire message. It's just a really fun thing to do, especially for a younger person. Like if you had a nephew or a niece or anybody. The other thing I wanted to say is that again, right around 1910, there was a type of card called a puzzle card. And they were in sometimes enormous, they'd be like poster size once you assembled them all. And you had to get all of them to put them together to see what the entire image was.
Wow.
So there are wonderful series of river systems in Germany and maps of World War I invasions and the Prussians coming, and each postcard individually reads as its own image. But then you put them all together and there's this other giant image that emerges once you have everything. So you can still do it in this fun way I did to Alan.
Catherine, what do you do now with the Lake Forest County? I mean, do you collect postcards for them? I mean, I don't know.
Oh, no. No, I was just hired to develop that project a long time ago. I was still a graduate student when I was hired to do that project, to figure out the Kurt Teich postcard archives. And in fact, the story is I'll just tell it very, very briefly, that they assigned a building in one of our forest preserves for this purpose. And once the collection started, the original industrial collection started coming up from Chicago, it came up over the course of 5 days. And day one, the building was, we were ready, but the building was empty. And every day for 5 days, a full-size Mayflower moving van would pull up in front of this building, and they would open the doors to the side of the van, and the material would be flushed to the
Oh my God.
and it was like triage, because we're just like, okay, put those green ones over there and put those wooden ones over there. And we were just sort of looking at the cases, just to like cases in that room, these cases in that room. And so day one, we had nothing. And day 5, we had 5 Mayflower moving vans of material with no instructions. I mean, we had to figure out the numbering systems. We had to figure out
Wow.
everything. And I think I was just too young at the time to be overwhelmed. Just like, okay, this is a job. Yes. Let's go. Everybody grab a postcard.
That's remarkable.
How long did it take you?
Well, it took about 3 years before we got to the point of that we felt we could begin to provide access to the collection, that we had enough of a handle on inventorying it, figuring out all the number systems so that we could begin to provide access. And then, I mean, this was a long time ago. I started working, the collection came in December of 1982. So I was still a grad student. I was a student, I had not graduated yet from University of Chicago. And I needed money, you know, because
We do.
so I answered an ad in the Chicago Tribune because in 1982, that's how that's one way you might do it. And the ad, I was looking under artist because I do illustration, and there under archivist, who knew, was right next to it, was Percy catalog postcards. And, you know, Lake County Forest Preserve District. I'm not from Chicago. I came to Chicago for graduate school, so I didn't know really where Lake County was or certainly anything about the Forest Preserve District. And and here I am today. So it took, I don't know, 3 years before we actually were able to provide access. And then we just kept cataloging. We had a staff of 5 people. 3 of them were full-time catalogers for years, where we developed this cataloging system where you could do Boolean searches. So you could say, I want to see all the Oriental Revival bandstands in the state of New Jersey between this date and this date.
Wow.
You could, or I want to see everything that has to do with suffragettes in Pennsylvania or something like that.
This is why it was so incredibly useful when I was doing exhibits or publications, because you knew exactly what you wanted, and they always had it, always.
Years ago, Catherine, and I would love to find them again. They were these compilations of the most boring postcards that had ever been issued. And my daughter and I were in Seattle at the time, and we just giggled. And they were like your boring postcards of the interior. Where could I find those collections? Where should I do the search? Because I'd love to have those again.
Well, there's a couple of books that are the world's most boring postcards. I'm sure you can get them online somehow. Just put in book, world's most boring postcards.
Okay.
You'll find them. Those are inexpensive. You can go to a postcard show and just ask for really boring cards. And
because we just giggled.
Find them and send them to Tally now.
Catherine, I don't know if you remember that I went with you to the Tyke building.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, before the whole thing came over. It was really quite amazing.
It was amazing. That building that I showed you early on, which still is there, it's either apartments or condos. I don't know which it is, but it's residences. But back before it was purchased and it turned into residences, it was, I don't know, it was like going into any big industrial space. It has an eeriness to it and a kind of a profound nostalgia of other times and all that was published out of that building. It's very cool. And the building's still intact. It's just, and
Do you know where it is?
Yeah, it's at Irving Park in Ravenswood.
Irving,
Barbara, if you Google
1755 West Irving Park.
What am I doing?
It's very close to.
Hi, Betty. Super Bowl.
Hi, I look forward to talking to you. But the building is very close to Lil Street Studios.
Yes, right across the street.
Yes, it's across this. Yep, you're right.
Barbara, if you Google most boring postcards, you get 1,340,000 results. So I don't think they'll have, and starting with this, and Amazon and others. So I don't, and that there's that postcard that you showed, Catherine, of the store with the Ferris wheel display, that's for sale
Oh,
for $299 online.
yeah. Those real photo interiors the real photo postcards are very valuable. They're highly sought after. The more detail, the more valuable they are.
1909.
I wanted to say one other really super quick thing that I don't present in this presentation, but the Tyke Company during World War II, since Alan mentioned this big industrial space, they almost ceased production of postcards. They just had like a shadow production of postcards during the World War II years, and instead were contracted by the Army Map Service and printed out of that factory in Chicago most of the territorial and invasion maps for the Army Map Service during World War II. And that's interesting because Tyke was a first generation German immigrant who had only come, in 1898 to this country. But that was what they did during World War II. And then after, the family still remembers that all of the maps had to be counted. All of the cut strips from the trim had to be counted and made sure that they matched the same amount. It was a highly secret thing. But in Chicago, most of the territorial and invasion maps for the Army Map Service were printed by this postcard company. I don't talk about it in the presentation because it's not about postcards, really. It's this other story over here.
And then you had General Patton, who went across Germany using a Guide Michelin map.
A what map?
Guide Michelin.
It was the French guide maps, very detailed.
Did he? Well, they didn't give him the maps. He didn't have the clearance, Barbara.
Right. But what was fascinating in the movie, I've always loved that fact. And in the movie Patton, there's a point at a battlefield and he's in outside the command car. He opens a map and I'm looking because I know this fact. And indeed, it was the appropriate map.
Isn't that funny?
It's been wonderful.
I found out, this is according with one of your postcards, and because all of you love India, that Rolling Stone postcard you showed, I just recently found out, you know how he has that tongue sticking out, the emblem for the Rolling Stone?
Mm-hmm.
It's on Goddess Kali.
It's Kali.
That was just the bizarrest thing I came across. It was because it was during the 60s, there was a big thing, all the tantric pictures.
They were all in India, yeah.
So that's the symbol. I was like, I would have never put Mick Jagger and India together.
Right.
But there you go, find the oddest things.
It's a small world.
It is.
Do they collect? I'm sure they do, but are there some famous collectors of in other parts of the world who collect postcards? Like I don't remember Indian postcards. Alan, had you seen them, postcards in India? Like maybe now, but growing up, all I ever saw were the plain ones, brown ones where you write. Do you guys remember seeing postcards in India?
Tons
As you
that's
said,
interesting. Not really.
as you said that, Shoma, I'm going in a different direction. But one of the things that I used to look for regularly in India, because they are a visual souvenir for me, is playing cards. And they're hard to find in India, but there's normally wonderful monuments are recorded on playing cards. And then there's also the Kama Sutra ones.
Right.
Mara?
Yeah, I was gonna say, there are tons of postcards in India, and there are all those ones in Khajuraho.
Oh, yes, yes.
The outside of the, from all
Of course.
yeah.
I bet you were looking, Mara, for your erotica collection.
Well, I have to tell you, my mother had quite a collection of postcards, and they were prominent in her collection.
I never knew India had postcards, but
Yes.
Well, you weren't wandering around tourist.
that's right. Thank you, Barbara, for always protecting. I remember just the plain ones.
Yeah. It's funny.
Thank you. This has been marvelous.
It has been.
Oh, Catherine, thank you for coming to us, and Alan for making the introduction.
Thank you.
This
Thank you
was
for being postcards.
fabulous.
I
I
just,
want the Japanese one. If I'm going to be greedy, I'll send you my.
Yeah, no, I'll send, if you send me your address, I'll send you your.
I shall. Thank you.
I just knew that you all would love Catherine and
Oh,
Oh, it's
yes.
wonderful.
and that she would love you in return. So
Wonderful. We're gonna be correspondents, however briefly.
I mean, what's
Be
so
wonderful.
bizarre about the whole salon is that we've never met except Merle, whom I didn't recognize once because she had a mask on and I'd only seen her in a tiny little square. I'd never
Oh,
seen her in
golly.
person.
Oh,
So,
Did anyone
Barbara.
see that wonderful gag painting of the Last Supper? And everybody's in a Zoom square.
And
Just
Bernie was sitting next to Jesus.
and who
Of
was?
course.
Bernie.
Bernie, yeah, with the gloves.
Oh, that's another one.
well, I have to tell you, so maybe, I don't think this will jinx it. I think it'll give it good luck that for this year, I have applied for a Guggenheim Fellowship to look at, for a project to look at the connection between postcards, this common sort of low art cultural communication piece, and high art, and see where the connections are, see how they unfold each other and how they reveal each other. So we'll see. We'll know in April. Very
Oh, how much
competitive.
fun for you.
I'm hoping
You'll let us know. You have
I will
our
let you know.
emails.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? It's, I mean,
And any presentations you're doing, we're interested and we'll be
Sure.
there.
Obviously.
Oh, since
That's
the
fun.
Humanities Council is now, the Rhodes Scholar programs are now virtual, does that mean that people who don't happen to be in tiny town Illinois can also join do you have?
oh yeah. Oh yes, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're all absolutely, yeah.
Excellent.
So yeah, if you know of anybody who I can send, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay.
I'm speaking, I'm already booked for 2021 and I have 3 others lined up outside of that. And yeah, they all have to be public accessible and they're on Zoom.
Right.
So
yeah.
Wonderful.
Fabulous.
Free and open to the public.
Free and open to the public, right?
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, be well, be healthy.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Wonderful to meet all of you. You're all beautiful.
Take care.
Just have
Bye.
a good time.
Bye.
Wow.